The Future History of Energy and Transportation. Documenting the paradigm shift from the era of oil and internal combustion to the era of robotics. By Julian Cox. Narrated by the author with the aid of an artificial intelligence. Chapter 7. Of Human Labor in an Autonomous World. Author's note: a guiding principle for leadership when growing a business is to deploy the leadership team to face the whirlwind continuously, exploring and solving the most significant issue on the critical path to the mission of the business. This with the ultimate aim of reducing solutions to systems, with checks and measures in place so that solutions stay solved with a minimum of management bandwidth. Then to hire or promote personality types who place a high value on the umbrella of leadership to provide shelter from the whirlwind, to nurture and scale those solutions. Not with the objective of firing the team that solved it. Instead to stand on the shoulders of solved issues to face the whirlwind again and again on issues of greater value. While it is true that very often the trailing edge of the curve will see frustrating toil replaced by systematic solutions, so long as the mission is actually critical in the eyes of customers, the head of the curve and area under it is expanding the quantity and quality of employment such that almost everyone involved is either doing something they want to do for a living or challenged by obvious opportunities for advancement due to continuous improvement. Experience of serving in this form of leadership role has given rise to great skepticism over fears of human redundancy due to automation. Once again, if the competition to robots is terrified of robots, that would seem to be a clear market signal to get involved in building lots and lots of robots. That market will expire when we run out of worlds to conquer and run out of people that want more out of life than doing some chore a machine could take care of, basically never. At the outer limit of automation there is indeed nothing left to do but to imagine, desire, persuade and agree with one another to act. It is almost invariably the case that people work harder given the chance to work directly on something they actually want to work on. While unemployment certainly creates no value that a person can attract from society besides the proceeds of compassion and perhaps an advance on future potential, merely expending time and effort is not enough to attract income. What is generally required in productive adulthood at least, is to add something of value to at least one other person. A customer, an investor or some other human relation. As a baseline, earning power can be expected to go up in proportion to the number of people positively affected either directly or through the actions of a team and by how much that is reasonably, or unreasonably, attributable to the earner. Microsoft was an example of a relatively few people adding value to the lives of millions of people through developing and publishing software for information robots, computers. This is the point, and it is not knocking the dignity of hard work, certainly not those forms of hard work that are cherished by those that perform it, including motherhood, and whose output is valued precisely because of the human touch, be that as a musician, an artist or an artisan in the broadest sense, or for example in learning and healing professions. Since the advent of hot and cold running water, for those so fortunate, a servant to carry water from a nearby river, pond or well and to heat some up over a fire, is no longer required. What is less obvious is the fact that for the vast majority of people with access to hot and cold running water on demand, a servant to replicate this function is not affordable. This example helps to illustrate the inverse of a piece of received wisdom. That is to say that neither the average US or European homeowner, nor the would-be domestic servant, if the clock was rewound 100 or so years, is so much richer in terms of their ability to pay people to fetch and heat water on demand for their comfort, than there ever was. Rather that the number of domestic servants required to live relatively conveniently and comfortably by historical standards, has dropped over time from many servants to zero, and it is because of this that broad accessibility to a comfortable home has risen, accordingly. Opportunity has extended to those whose forebears were denied advancement in order to retain their services, including those faced with the choice of unreasonable working conditions as an alternative to starvation and even enslaved. Addressing and reducing the bit-part labor incorporated in products required to live comfortably, must therefore extend improvements along those same trend lines, both of raising general living standards and by delivering opportunity for advancement to a still broader population. The era of robotics is even more than this. It heralds an economic inversion, from seeking to reduce the total amount of labor required to meet the needs of a customer, to reintroducing the affordability of servants to the average household. A fully autonomous vehicle is quite literally a servant that can be owned and whose labor can be traded, by its owner. The same will apply to autonomous robotics, capable of performing other tasks besides transportation, and the combination, the ability for a mechanical servant to travel to a worksite autonomously and then to perform a valuable task autonomously, will prove powerful indeed. This is discussed in more detail in the concluding portion of the chapter, A Hierarchy of Efficiency, Service and Systems Level Efficiency. At its essence then, eliminating human labor that is sunk directly or indirectly into subsistence and maintenance, increases general standards of living. It does so by lowering the basic cost of living, improving the affordability of more interesting things, and by permitting a greater proportion of human labor to shift focus from subsistence and maintenance to learning, creativity, design, and to the engineering and direction of assets. Improving labor efficiency does not eliminate the human desire to add value to others, or limit the income to be derived from making the customer happy. It just shifts the competition in the direction of those things people want to add value to, as a matter of passion and opportunity, rather than the kind of work performed out of necessity to survive, or more accurately what we find ourselves condemning large sections of the population to do in a chain of events linked to subsistence. Similarly, numerous maintenance tasks, such as performing an oil change, are unpleasant to perform and are simply a distress purchase for the customer, because no net value is added in repeatedly dealing with a problem that deserves to be designed out of cars, and has been in the case of an electric vehicle. Competition for social standing is innate, likely immovable, and probably desirable in terms of meritocracy. Mass human poverty is not a prerequisite for wealth of a few. Machine slavery will do just fine for those jobs that only the hard up would apply for, and the result will not be more desperation and poverty but the opposite, broader access to and affordability of a decent standard of living, and therefore, richer customers. There will never be a state of general unemployment in the presence of the human will to imagine harder and challenge one another to become more creative and to attain skills and learning of value to other people. Making customers happy is value, and generally that value goes up, not down, the further distant and the more esoteric the customer's needs are, from battling their own imminent starvation. Just like automated washing machines and dishwashers, useful automated machines of all kinds are tools that serve to multiply the effective net productivity of the individual and to reduce the necessity for humans to expend time and effort tied to subsistence and to unprofitable maintenance tasks that need to be handled, but so much the better if they are handled effortlessly. Every step in this direction will be turmoil for those temporarily waylaid by shifts in working patterns, from low-value occupations to higher-value occupations, and every step will improve the height and the reach of improved living standards. As it ever has. There may very well be a case for a universal basic income as automation progresses, but not because there is nothing left of value for people to do for each other. Rather because the basics of subsistence will trend towards too cheap to meter until eventually they could be understood to have sunk below the opportunity cost to society to have anyone struggling to gain marketable skills or struggling to nurture children through to productive adulthood for want of food, clothes, clean water, shelter, and access to mobility. Meanwhile, in the century immediately before us, there is plenty of work to do before 7 or so billion people are all of them adequately supplied with the tools and freedoms to fulfill their own potential. In terms of energy and transportation alone, that is a lot of new customers that can and will be reached by robotics when, for example, a mile of autonomous transportation costs pennies on the dollar to deliver in comparison to 20th century technology. This is explored in more detail in the concluding chapter, specifically the section entitled Dynamics of Autonomous Mileage Markets.